Hello class. In this lesson, you're basically going to learn to identify and define and apply the 7 elements of art using a landscape drawing. In the end, you're going to know what the elements are, how to identify them, and how to use them to draw your own unique landscape. So we're going to start by drawing together in these first couple lessons, and then in the final lesson you'll be asked to take all that you've learned and creatively synthesize it into your own unique landscape drawing. So let's get started. Everybody's going to need a 9 by 12 sheet of paper like the one in front of me here, and you'll need a pencil. All right, when you're all set, you can feel free to pause the video or have your substitute teacher pause the video and move along at your own pace. Try to get through the lesson if you can today. It's about 25 minutes long. All right. All right, today the objective for us is to identify, define, and apply the 7 elements of art. And we're going to do that using a landscape drawing. So we're basically going to start by defining each of the 7 elements, writing a definition, identifying those elements, and then applying them to a landscape drawing. Now this landscape drawing we do initially is going to be a small one like the one you see here in front of you, just kind of 9 by 12. We're just going to draw it just so you get the gist of what's expected. But then I want you to play around with the elements of art to create your own landscape drawing on a large piece. This I anticipate will take us about 3 lessons and then several classes for you to take what you've learned in those lessons and apply them. And so today's lesson, we're going to again identify, define, and apply the 7 elements of art. We'll probably get through the first 3, line, shape, and form. And then next time we'll move on to value, texture, space, and then finally in the third we go into color. Because color really takes it in the direction you want it. Color can define whether it's a nighttime scene or an evening scene or a mid-afternoon scene. That's going to be determined by the color choices that you make. So let's get started. What you'll need is a pencil like this, just a number 2 pencil, and a 9 by 12 piece of paper like the one I have here. We're going to start by placing the 9 by 12 paper in a portrait view like this, because what I want us to do is write down the objectives. The first thing I would like you to do is put your name on it. And then typically I have teachers and students put their section number. And so the section number, put the section number here. And we're going to start by writing the objective. Why are we doing this in the first place? So we're going to put the objective. And it should be also here on your screen. But the objective is basically for each student to be able to identify, define, and apply the 7 elements of art. Now again, the 7 elements of art are very important. Why? Because they're the basic properties of everything that you see. You can't see anything if you don't have one of these properties of art, or these elements of art. They are line, shape, form, value, texture, space, and color. So they become very important when you want to see something. And so for the visual arts, that's why we start with the elements of art. And you'll learn about these in every art program that you take, because they're the basics of everything we see. So we're going to start first of all with a line. So go ahead and write the word line. And again, I'm on the same side of the page we're going to be writing on. We'll draw on the other side of the page. So on this side, you're going to write the word line, And then I want you to put in parentheses the number 1, D, closing parentheses. 1D means one-dimensional. And then you're going to take that line and you're going to define it. And we're going to put just a simple definition: the path of a point. The path of a point. Can't be any simpler than this. And that one dimension we're talking about, that single measurable dimension, is length. And so what I want you to do is just draw under your definition, draw a simple line, or a line segment you might call it. And we're going to put the distance, just a little distance marker, in the letter L, standing for length. So that one dimension of line would be length. So if you're measuring something's length, we're talking about the line. It's a linear measurement. The second element is shape. So go ahead and write that down. Now shape is 2D or two-dimensional. So you'll notice I'm writing it 2D, two-dimensional, in parentheses. And my simple definition for shape is an enclosed space. An enclosed space. And so what I would like you to do for your illustration of this is to draw a circle and a pentagon. Circle and a pentagon, and you could even draw just a kind of an organic leaf shape, if you will. So again, shape basically is two dimensions. You can measure the width. So I put a little W there. You can measure the height, or sometimes it's called length and width. It depends on what you're measuring, but typically there's two dimensions. So that's when we're talking about shapes. So I can measure it one direction this way and then another direction this way. This is more of an organic shape, while these are more geometric shapes. All right. So let's go ahead now that we've got those and start drawing with them. So I'm going to flip my paper over and put it where you can see it. And basically what I want to do is kind of estimate the halfway point of my page. And we're going to draw something very simple, but I'm going to have you estimate the halfway point just to kind of keep it balanced between the top and the bottom, and put a little mark there at the halfway point with the long edges on the top and the bottom. Long edges on the top and the bottom. And what you're going to do is you're going to end up going off the page over here where my pencil is. If the center is here, I'm going to go a little bit lower than the center, somewhere down here. Just a little bit below the center. And I want you to use, there's all kinds of lines you could use. You could use straight lines. You could probably think of your own, on your own, you could probably think of a ton of different lines. Straight lines, zigzag lines, curved lines, flowing lines, wavy lines. So what we're going to do is just simply start with a curved line that kind of curves up, curves down, and then comes off the page. So it appears as though this might be a hill, and we're going to do some things in the background when we get to space and value and texture. But basically we start with a basic, what we call a horizon line, and it could be a straight line if you're doing a seascape. In this case we're doing a field, kind of a field here, so you can see that I've drawn this curved line to start out our drawing. So then what I would like you to do is take, and somewhere where you think the center is, somewhere halfway between the 2 points, put a little point, and you're going to draw some zigzag lines like this. Zigzag lines that zig and zag right off the page. we could put some more zigzag lines in there later. But what we're going to do next is we're going to balance this out, and we're going to put some textured lines here, some like treetop, these things that look like treetops that are just beyond that hill. So we've got 3 different lines here. We've already got a nice kind of setup for our landscape. Now, one of the things I'd like to do is include, you could make this a river or a road, but even if it's a river or a road, you basically draw it the same way. The difference comes when we add the texture to it. So what I would like you to do is, starting somewhere over here where my pencil is, you'll have to look at my pencil tip here. We're going to start somewhere over here where my pencil tip is. And we're going to bring in a line that's kind of wavy, and I'm going to have it go towards one side and then come off near the bottom. So I'm going to have it go towards the right and come off somewhere near the center of the left. So if you look here, so I start here, comes in, and then comes off. Now the idea here is that the river or the road, whichever you're going to make this, needs to appear to disappear at this vanishing point. So if you're doing this and you've studied vanishing points, then you know what I'm talking about. Basically, we're going to start again at that same point where it crosses the horizon line. We're going to start very thin and just kind of follow that line out, making it a little bit wider each time. And like I said, it can be a road or it could be a river. So this could be an old dirt road or it could be a river, depending on what texture we put. But again, all we're doing is playing around with the element of line and putting it in different positions. Now, I think that's it for the lines for now. You know what? We'll do one more line. We're going to do sort of a curved hill type line. A curved hill type line, just to give some more depth to our drawing. And so we have basically one horizon line, then above the horizon line a zigzag line. Below that we have these curved overlapping lines which look like smaller mountains, and then below we've got some more textured lines that remind us of trees. So that's a line. Now shape, do you remember what shape was? Shape was two-dimensional. Shape basically has length and width, and we had several shapes that we drew on the back. One of them was a circle, and so what I would like you to do is figure out where you want your either sun or your moon, depending on what you make this into. So at this point, I think we're going to add a house in this area. So let's put a circle in the sky. It could be small, medium, or large, and that's really up to you. Put a circle in the sky, and it doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, if it's less perfect, it looks more hand-drawn, and that's what makes your drawings unique, is how you draw your circles and how you draw your shapes. So we draw the circle. And then if we look at this in terms of balance, we really don't have anything here in this area. We don't have much here in this area. So let's think in terms of balance. If I have a circle up here, let's draw that pentagon shape somewhere in here, about the same size as we drew the sun. And so that pentagon shape starts out like a little square, but then you're going to just add to it a peak. And of course, most of us would recognize this as kind of an abstract landscape, and we might say that looks like a house, or that looks like a boat floating in the water. And it could be either one at this point. All right, so that's shape. So we have line and shape. Now the next element of art that we're going to work with is form, because we're going to want to make this look a little more three-dimensional. So let's flip the paper over, and go back to our definition. So we had line and shape. So line was one-dimensional. Shape is two-dimensional. Form is the third element of art. Form. And how many dimensions do you think form has? Form has 3 dimensions. We live in this kind of a 3-dimensional world, or at least visually it looks 3-dimensional. The 4th dimension could perhaps be time, and some speculate there are more dimensions, just not visual dimensions. But form is our 3rd dimension. And so for form, what I would like you to write is mass, comma, volume. It's this appearance of being mass and volume. And you hear those terms in science class. Mass and volumes are terms you might hear in science. So what we're going to do is we're going to take those same 3 drawings we drew here for shape, and we're going to move them down here. So we're going to put the circle. We're going to put the pentagon. And we're going to draw just kind of an organic little blob looking shape. Except now we have 3 dimensions. So we haven't lost it. We have height. If I put a little h there, we have width. So I put a little w there. We have, again, length. We might call it length going this way, and width going this way. And we still have these, just another, we could call it again length and width, length and width going this way. But now we're going to add a 3rd dimension. Now for the house looking shape, it's easy. For these rectangular prisms, it's very easy to do. What you're going to do is simply draw 3 lines, 1, 2, 3, to add thickness, or what we call depth. And depth becomes that 3rd dimension. So D for depth, going back into space. So that's why it's called 3 dimensions. You have length, width, and depth, or in this case, height, width, and depth. And the depth would be from the front of the sphere to the back of the sphere. And for this one, it would be length, width, and height. So how high is this blob resting? How high is this blob resting? And so we would just put a little h here for height. So to make this sphere look more like a 3-dimensional sphere, what we're going to have to do is add some shading to give it this depth, because right now it doesn't look like there's any depth here. So what we're going to have to do is add some shading to indicate that this is now a ball form. This is a sphere, and we'll put a shadow. Now when you add this light and shadow, you're actually adding the 4th element. And so why don't we go ahead and add that right now. The 4th element we need to create this shading effect is called value. And value is simply light and shadow. Value is light and shadow. Go ahead and write that down. Light and shadow. So you can see form in a drawing kind of merges in with value. You really need that value when you're drawing the light and shadow to make it look 3-dimensional. That's why your video games will look so 3-dimensional. You'll see the shadows and things. So we could do the same with the house. We'll add a shading to one side just to show it's a little bit darker on this side, and maybe a medium tone on this side. So what I would like you to do is go ahead and draw a square or a rectangle under value, and to the right you're going to simply draw 2 more of these. 1, 2 to the right, and 1, 2 to the left. And this is what we call a value scale. So on the left, we're going to put L, not for left, but for light. This is going to be our light value. On the right, we're going to put D for dark. So light value, dark value. And in the middle, we're going to put M for middle tone. And so since we're using a white piece of paper, we're going to leave it white, and that'll be our light value. Since we're using a pencil, we're going to shade this dark box as dark as we can. To make it as dark as we can, that it will create our darkest value. So we can go from light to dark. And what we want to do is gradually shade these in so they go gradually from light to dark or from dark to light. And so for my medium, I'm going to lift up some of that pressure, take off some of the pressure to make it a little bit lighter. In this box, we're going to make this a little bit darker than the medium, but not quite as dark as our darkest value. So we've got a medium dark that I'm going to label MD. And then here, it's going to be very, very light. So I'm almost not even touching the paper. So you can barely see it. We're going to call this a medium light. So that's basically called a value scale. A value scale, again, meaning light and shadow. And so we use that to apply to our drawing to make it look more three-dimensional, more realistic. Now you're going to color your final drawing, but for this one we'll use value to shade it. All right, so let's go and see if we can apply some of these things that we've learned. Well, first of all, we look at the circle and we notice that the circle looks a little flat. So what I would like you to do is just add an indication that it's three-dimensional. It's a sphere. And we know that if it's a sun, that it's actually a star and spherical. We know that if it's a moon, it's spherical as well, and it has craters on it. But either way, it's going to have that rounded look to it, like a sphere, like a ball. So just add a little shading to give that effect, to show that you know this is a sphere. All right. Then we move down into the mountains. And what we're going to do is draw a little bit of a line here to give it more form. And what I'm using is kind of a wavy line that comes down and up and down. You don't have to go all the way to the next line. You don't have to move your line all the way down. You just want to give it the illusion of form by adding a line from the peak that kind of squiggles down. Might be I call it a squiggly line. And then we take and add a little bit of value, a little bit of shading to the side away from the light. Now, why do we add it on this side and not the other side? Well, because our light, whether it's the sun or the moon, is hitting these mountains and casting a shadow. And so we're going to do this all the way across. And you'll notice it looks more three-dimensional once we've added the shading. All right, now let's take a look at this house. This house is kind of flat right now. This house is very two-dimensional. So what I would like you to do is take the house, and I'm going to turn my page a little just so it's easier for me to draw a straight line. And notice what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with the peak, and I'm going to draw a line to the left, just a kind of a straight line. That's going to define how thick my roof is. And I'm going to do the same thing here. So these two lines are parallel. We've talked about this before. Parallel lines. Because a rectangular prism like this one is going to have parallel lines. Okay, and then to close off the form, remember the front of the form should be parallel to the back of the form. The front of the form, notice, should be parallel to the back, even if you have to cut off or erase a little bit. Front of the form, parallel to the back. So now we've got the three-dimensional house here with length or height. It's high, it's wide, and it goes deep. It's back into space. So at this point, I'd like to think about the shadow of this form. The shadow of a form, I use an equation for this. The shadow of a dog looks like a dog. The shadow of a cat looks like a cat. The shadow of a house should look like a house. And so what I'm going to do is draw the lines of my house back, just like this. It's going to come across. I'm going to draw this line back and angle it up so that I can see the edge of my roof line here and here. I can see the sides reflected here, and there's my shadow of the house. Now again, don't worry about this being perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. But there it is. We have line, shape, form, and value. Now, since there is light coming down, we're going to have to give a little bit of shading on each of these planes just to show that we know these planes are in shadow. Now, we're not going to shade it real dark, but we are going to put some shading, maybe a medium light and a medium tone. So the medium tone will be on the roof and the back, and then the medium light would be on the front, and we can put a little bit darker tone in the shadow with the side of the pencil. And I think that's going to be about enough for this first time, for this first day or this first lesson. So go ahead and finish those up. I'll leave this here where you can see it. Make sure you hand everything in at the end. Make sure you're leaving time to clean up. And if you didn't finish this today, don't worry about it. You can watch it at home, but you're going to leave your work with the substitute teacher so she can collect it or he can collect it. Leave your work with the teacher and make sure you've got up to this point. If you didn't get up to this point, you can get to this one next time.